Welcome to NP Certification Q&A, presented by Fitzgerald Health Education Associates. This podcast is for NP students studying to pass their NP certification exam. Getting to the correct test answers means breaking down the exam questions themselves. Expert Fitzgerald faculty clinicians share their knowledge and experience to help you dissect the anatomy of a test question so you can better understand how to arrive at the correct test answer. So, if you're ready, let's jump right in.
Chantel is a 19-year-old female who presents for care because she thinks she is bipolar. During her initial interview, she admits that she has a long history of feeling like she was the person in the family of whom there were always high expectations, and she was never able to express her feelings of inadequacy. When asked why she thinks she is bipolar, she says she gets very moody. In fact, she was at the grocery store last week and slipped and fell, and while waiting for help, she couldn't control her anger and just reached up to swipe all the food off the shelves. She has been fired from jobs because of her uncontrollable temper. She sometimes, quote, just can't be around certain people, end quote. Chantel also reports that at times she will go 2 full days and nights without sleep, and that her mind keeps racing and she can't shut it down. When this happens, she gets up and does things around the house. Finally, Chantel reports that she cannot hold on to money at all. Whenever she gets a paycheck, she immediately spends it. She spends it on things that she acknowledges she doesn't even need. When considering a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, the psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner specifically assesses for A, any history of suicidal attempts or serious ideation, B, history and current patterns of substance abuse, C, concomitant psychotic features such as hallucination or delusion, or D, manic symptoms are sustained most of the day for at least 2 weeks. So again, go back and be sure that you understand precisely what the question is asking of you. It gives you a lot of information here about Chantel and her history and various things that she reports. But when you get down to it, the last question is really what the question is for you. When considering a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, the NP specifically assesses for. So, given everything that's presented here, when considering a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, you specifically assess for what? A, any history of suicidal attempts or serious ideation? So ask yourself, is a history of suicidal attempts or ideation one of the diagnostic criteria for bipolar disorder? I mean, you are going to assess for suicidal attempts or ideation. We do with any mental health patient. But when considering a diagnosis of bipolar, do you specifically assess for that? Or B, history and current patterns of substance abuse, or concomitant psychotic features such as hallucination or delusion, or D, manic symptoms sustained most of the day for 2 weeks. So again, you may or may not see any of these things. I mean, there might be a history of suicidal ideation, there might be concomitant psychotic features, and manic symptoms might be sustained for 2 weeks. But, the only thing that you have to specifically assess for from this list when making a diagnosis of bipolar disorder is B. B is the correct answer. The DSM-5 text revision criteria for bipolar disorder specifically requires a single multiple manic episode that meets 4 criteria. And Chantel clearly meets the first 3. She has a distinct period of abnormality and persistently elevated mood for at least a week. She has at least 3 of 7 specific behaviors described in your criteria. And the symptoms cause marked impairment. I mean, she's been fired from her job. The 4th criteria is the symptoms are not the result of a substance abuse or substance abuse disorder. And so, if you get all of this information about Chantel, when considering a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, you must specifically assess for B, history and current patterns of substance abuse, because if she is currently abusing substances, then you can't make the diagnosis of bipolar disorder if any of these symptoms are attributable to substance abuse. I mean, this is characteristic of virtually every psychiatric diagnosis. You need to rule out that the symptoms are a consequence of substance abuse. Again, A may or may not be there, B may or may not be there, and D may or may not be there. I mean, 2 weeks is a long time. That's not a diagnostic criteria. While A, C, and D may or may not be there, you must specifically assess for B. You've got to assess for history and current patterns of substance abuse, because if there is any suggestion that substance abuse could explain the symptoms, then you cannot make a diagnosis of bipolar disorder.
Thank you for listening to NP Certification Q&A, presented by Fitzgerald Health Education Associates. Please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. And for more NP resources, visit FHEA.com.